Beware the stare of Mary Shaw. She had no children, only dolls. And if you see her in your dreams, be sure you never ever scream. You're doing some plumbing at home when a creepy ventriloquist doll shows up at your front door. Your wife gets killed and you end up as a prime suspect in her murder case. Follow along as I guide you through the horrors, and we try our best to survive the tongue-ripping ghost in Deadsilence. If you like this video, consider liking and subscribing. Jamie and Lisa are a happily married couple, cruising their way through life, when suddenly the doorbell rings. Someone left a huge package with no sender information, no return address, and only Jamie's name written with a pencil. This doesn't seem like something that was brought by the mail, and while it doesn't seem dangerous at first glance, it is very strange. Examining the box it came in should be the first course of action, and if they paid attention, they would have noticed that it belonged to Mary Shaw, a scary poem told to them as kids, which should have put them a bit more on edge due to the ghost stories surrounding her. They don't do this and instead make fun of the doll and decide to split up like they're the gang from Scooby-Doo.
I don't know about you, but Lisa's hungry for Chinese.
Lisa is alone in the apartment while Jamie goes to pick up food, and weird things start happening.
God, I'm such a loser.
Okay, that's odd. She covers up the doll, and all the sound in the apartment starts slowly disappearing. Lisa hears a faint whisper coming from under the sheet where she put the doll. Approaching it is stupid, because at best it is an elaborate prank designed to scare the heart out of your chest, and at worst it is a possessed doll baiting you towards it. Lisa is about to unveil the sheet when she is suddenly launched across the room. She coughs up some strawberry jam and turns to scream as she is pulled back into the room by something. Alright, let's back up a bit. When weird things start happening and reality seems to warp around you, the most likely scenario is either a drug trip or a gas leak of some kind. I would check my carbon monoxide detector to see if anything is leaked into the apartment, and if I didn't have one, I would get one immediately. There was a guy on Reddit a few years ago who had been leaving himself post-it notes without realizing it due to a carbon monoxide leak, and any sort of gas leak can be seriously dangerous. The best course of action would be simply leaving your apartment for an extended amount of time until you've gotten it checked. The other likely possibility is that the doll has been smeared with something and you're simply tripping. Washing your hands and getting rid of the doll might do the trick, but it's unlikely if it's already in your system. Besides, you wouldn't want to approach the doll anyway once it starts speaking to you. Carelessly manhandling the doll could come back to bite you in the ass at this point. You could wait it out to see if it passes, but I wouldn't want to stay alone in the apartment after this experience. Leaving the apartment is still your best bet at this point. You can always come back and get rid of the doll at a later date. It's not going to go anywhere. The third and least likely possibility is that the doll is either possessed or cursed. This is extremely unlikely as curses and possessions can't happen in real life. This obviously doesn't count if you're the protagonist in a horror movie. Unless you are a psychic, a medium, or regularly read up on possessions on the internet, this is not something you can defeat without help. We should run out the apartment ASAP and don't come back until we have hired a priest or gotten some sort of outside help. A Bible and some holy water might help, but as we know, it's not exactly the most reliable fix. But as of right now, it's the best alternative we have. Getting rid of or burning the doll might not be enough if it has imprinted on you, or if the spirit has already left the doll and latched onto either you or your wife. As I mentioned, you shouldn't go and check it out alone, but if curiosity gets the best of you and you have balls of steel, you should at least grab something to arm yourself with, such as this guitar right here. Lisa does none of this and instead tries to sneak up on the talking doll and loses her life over her stupid decisions. I imagine she really regrets her life choices right about now. While her death might not seem significant at first glance, it does show us that the entity can physically harm you. Although it never happens to Jamie, this shows that we are not as safe as you might think. Ripping out your tongue is her way of finishing you off, but she can still cause you bodily harm to get you to that point. Jamie arrives back home to find Lisa missing.
Oh, Lisa!
I'm in here.
She calls out to him and he finds her right next to a bloody floor.
Lisa, this is not funny.
He does the same stupid move as Lisa and moves towards the bloody bedsheet. Jamie hasn't seen anything to suspect anything supernatural, and he hears Lisa talk to him, so apart from the blood, there doesn't seem to be anything that could possibly be dangerous. He finds her with her tongue ripped out and his world is absolutely shattered. I'd say telling the cops the truth here is the best course of action. Making up a story that could be easily disproven would simply make him more suspicious. And even if they don't believe you, there have been similar cases happening in the past that the police can look up. They might think you're crazy, but after going through old police files or checking up with other police stations, they should be able to acquire more information. Suspecting a rampant serial killer or some sort of copycat that follows the same MO would be more likely than Jamie suddenly losing his mind and murdering his wife. But if the police won't take us seriously, venturing out in search for answers on our own seems like the next logical step.
Look, you can go, Ash.
Good. Now give me more time to do your job for you.
Jamie goes back to his apartment and further explores the box that the doll came in. He sees that it belonged to Mary Shaw and travels back to his hometown of Ravens Fair where he was born, both to ask his father about Mary Shaw and to plan his wife's funeral. I would have also taken a swab test of the dummy just to be sure. For all you know, it could have vacationed in Chernobyl before being sent to you. He arrives and is greeted by his dad's new wife and finds out that his dad had a stroke a couple months ago.
What happened to you?
Your father had a stroke 2 months ago.
Jamie asks about the ghost story of Mary Shaw and they claim there was no truth to it and only superstition. I would say that your dad who's had a stroke or the woman you've never met before aren't the most reliable sources of information, so I would definitely dig deeper into it by interviewing the locals and visiting the local library to check out the town's history. Even if it's your own paranoia getting to you, your wife getting murdered minutes after you get sent a doll belonging to Mary Shaw should be cause for concern. Next, Jamie goes to the funeral home to pick out a casket for his wife. And I would ask Henry here about Mary Shaw. The town's history is clearly troubled and getting a bit more information from a local surely wouldn't hurt. Henry tells him that Lisa will arrive later that night, so Jamie takes him to a hotel to get some rest. Even if the doll isn't possessed, you would certainly be dealing with quite a bit of grief and PTSD, so distancing yourself from the doll would probably help your mental health. Jamie instead brings it into the hotel and places it in the window.
Jamie!
He gets startled by someone saying his name and sees a creepy looking old lady in the corner of the room. Turning on the light fortunately gets rid of her, but there couldn't have been a guarantee. Since everything happened so fast, I'd say there wasn't too much we could have done differently, and he's not sure if he was hallucinating or what was happening. Jamie seems to think he was just having a nightmare and moves on with the funeral as planned. He sees Marion, the lady with a pet raven. She walks away from the funeral and he follows her. She confronts him and asks if he saw her.
Beware the stare of Mary Shaw. She had no children, only dolls. And if you see her in your dream...
Marion!
She then recites the Mary Shaw poem, and as she's whisked away, she tells him to bury the doll. Even if what she's saying is the ramblings of a crazy lady, she is a local who has lived through the ghost stories. And with everything happening, I'd heed her advice. It would at least give us some peace of mind. Jamie also finds Mary Shaw grave, which proves that she was in fact a real person and not just a ghost story. Looking up her pictures could prove to yourself that she is the person you saw in the hotel. And as I mentioned previously, going to the local library should do the trick, as they would certainly know about her since she was a big part of the town's past, and you might be able to find some pictures there. Jamie instead rushes back to his hotel to inspect the doll and finds out that it did in fact belong to Mary Shaw. So he takes Marion's advice and goes to bury the doll to hopefully get some peace of mind, and maybe even bury his own demons. I think waiting until nighttime when it's dark and you can't see shit is a bad idea, but as Jamie shows time and time again, he's absolutely fearless. I would also have told someone of my whereabouts before going to the cemetery, just in case something were to happen to me or I disappear. Having backup would have also been a good idea, but he doesn't seem to know anyone in this town apart from his wheelchair-ridden dad. Jamie waddles through the cemetery and eventually finds Billy's grave. All the sound starts whistling out again, but it doesn't deter Jamie. And after the deed is done, he gets back in the car and is about to drive away, when something starts happening outside the car. But it disappears by the time he steps out, and then he arrives back at his hotel room. While stepping out of the car might seem dangerous at first glance, there's no reason to believe that a ghost will have any problems getting through a locked car door. Even a regular human could make their way into a locked car with something as simple as a brick or a rock. So in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it would have changed much or really mattered.
Thought I asked you not to leave the city.
He's surprised to see Billy sitting on his bed and Detective Lipton waiting for him. The detective is not at all convinced of Jamie's explanation of what happened to his wife, but Jamie sticks to his guns, which I agree with. But as I mentioned previously, he should have gone to the town's library for some additional information that he could have given to the police. They haven't mentioned which year the movie is set in, but I imagine it would be in the year it came out, which would be around 2006, 2007. This was before the internet really exploded and became the massive encyclopedia that it is today, so the library would be the best place to get information. If the police has more concrete evidence, you might not be the primary suspect anymore, or they could even aid you in your search for answers.
Good night, neighbor.
The detective instead takes Billy with him and spends the night next to Jamie's hotel room. The next day, Jamie sneaks into the hotel room to steal Billy back. He then brings Billy to Marion to ask her about Mary Shaw, which I also think is a viable option. She clearly knows more than she lets on. He doesn't get much from Marion, but luckily Henry is a bit of an exposition dump instead. Mary Shaw was in fact a real person who lived in the town back in the glory days of Raven's Fair. She was a ventriloquist who did shows at the local theater, and she seemed to be very successful, making the audience have some sort of part in the play, and while it isn't explicitly stated, she seemed to favor the younger people in the audience.
Where are you, Billy? You won't find me, Mother. Say thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
Henry's awfully creeped out when he finds out that she knows his name, and the play goes on, until another young boy calls out that he can see her lips moving, clearly angering Mary Shaw.
Now, who's the dummy?
A few weeks later, the boy went missing, and Henry plus some other townspeople suspected Mary Shaw. She was eventually murdered by some unknown assailants, and in her will she had two requests. She wanted to be buried with all her dolls, and she wanted to be made into a doll herself. I don't really know the legality of such requests. It might be more of a request than a demand, but I find it odd that the people who murdered her would allow such a thing. While his dad was still working on constructing a doll out of Mary Shaw's corpse, Henry snuck down at night to see her body, and it most likely scarred him for life. She starts floating in the air towards him while he holds his mouth shut, and she disappears when his dad shows up and flicks the light switch. It's hard to tell whether she simply wanted to keep her presence hidden from the adults, or if light is a weakness of hers. This is the second time we've seen her disappear after someone turns on the light, and it is certainly something we should keep in mind going forward. Afterwards, countless families were murdered, found without their tongues, and posed in family portraits. Lisa was the latest of these murders, and some of the cops had no files about these murders and immediately suspect Jamie of foul play. I find it hard to believe that countless of innocent families were murdered in a small town with a very similar MO, and no one brought in the FBI to investigate. There is clearly a serial killer on the loose, and they should have put more effort and resources into catching the perpetrator. Henry then says the killing won't stop, but so far it doesn't seem like Henry has had a personal encounter with the ghost of Mary Shaw. I would ask him if there are any links between the murders, and how he managed to stay unaffected by the curse for so long. We find out later that she hunts the families who took part in her murder, but that doesn't mean the other families are completely safe. Jamie doesn't dig any deeper and instead decides to go visit the old theater. I think you should have researched to see if there was any consistencies to her killings. Why did she suddenly show up now? Are there years between her killings, or is it simply done at random? Jamie goes exploring and eventually finds a box full of papers and a diary or a scrapbook of some sort that seems to have belonged to Mary Shaw. He gets jump scared and immediately decides to leave. So far, a lot has been done to scare him, and unless she intends to scare him into a heart attack, it never seems like Jamie has been in any physical danger so far. All he needs to do is keep himself from screaming, so I would have spent some more time in the theater to look for clues. There are lots of papers in the abandoned box, and we might have been able to find something valuable in there. Mary most likely wouldn't have left the box there if there were something that could be used against her, but there was some oversight from her, as we find out by the end. We then jump back to the funeral home and follow Henry for a bit. He hears his wife talk to Billy and has had enough.
Why have you gone so quiet?
He decides to bury the doll himself. But before he has time to do it, he hears some crying coming from the crawl space and stupidly assumes it's his wife. He crawls in to look for her, and then the door suddenly closes. I'd say he's messed up pretty bad at this point. and he realizes it himself when he hears the voice of Billy behind him. He turns to face the creepy-looking Mary Shaw and screams to his heart's content, only for Mary Shaw to rip out his tongue and take his life. Do I even need to comment on what he does wrong here? Henry walked past his wife in the previous room literally 5 seconds ago. There's no way she could have made her way in there by then.
I don't have time to play games.
Marion hiding in there seems to at least be a semi-regular occurrence, as we saw earlier, but it's laughable to assume she's in there now. While I obviously don't know the layout of the house, there doesn't seem to be any way to go in without going through this tiny door. I'd say there's enough evidence to presume that this is not Marion under the house, and he clearly believes in the curse of Mary Shaw and has seen the death caused by her firsthand. He should be smarter than this. He should also suspect that Mary Shaw might not be too happy with him trying to put Billy back in his resting place. But yeah, by the time the door shuts, there isn't really too much we can do unless there's a hidden light bulb in there. If there's no other way out apart from the door, then we need to find a way to knock it down or wait for someone to come release us, which could take time. Time we might not have, considering we're locked in with a ghost intent on killing us. If there is another way out, then we need to find it and crawl towards it ASAP, and we need to make sure we cover our mouth so we don't accidentally scream. We have yet to see any instances of Mary Shaw actually injuring people apart from ripping out their tongues, so this might be able to work if we're quick about it. However, knowing that Mary Shaw is onto us, our pulse should be skyrocketing, and it would be hard to think rationally at this point. We have yet to see anyone survive an encounter with her, which makes her exceptionally dangerous. So I'd say no matter what we do, Henry is pretty much a goner at this point. We jump back to Jamie, who has just arrived at his father's house. He comes in search for answers, and damn it, he will have them. His dad tells him that Mary Shaw was suspected of Michael Ashen's disappearance, so his family, along with others from Raven's Fair, took justice into their own hands. They forced her to scream and cut out her tongue, so now she has come back for revenge. She killed all the men that took part in her murder, and then killed their children, and their children's children. Jamie says he will stop this and proceeds to leave, but he meets Detective Lipton in the door. Lipton tells us that all 100 dolls had been dug up from their graveyard, and he wants to know why.
That's why I'm going to arrest you for stealing evidence, and then I'm going to sit you down, and you will...
What do you want me to tell you?
Something less perplexing than a ghost story. Come on.
Lipton is about to arrest Jamie when he gets a phone call. He hears Henry over the phone, who tells him to go back to the abandoned theater, as he has a way to stop Mary Shaw. Suspicious, but Henry has proven to be trustworthy so far. Mr. Detective isn't about to let him go, but Jamie gives him a light shove, which pushes him to the ground, and Jamie drives off. He was lucky that the phone call came in just in time. Instead of antagonizing a police officer who already dislikes you, I would offer to bring Lipton to the funeral home. Henry has pictures of the previous deceased victims, and it should be enough to convince the police to bring in backup. You can then proceed to the theater as planned, but now you have an entire police station covering your every flank. Even if bullets can't harm Mary Shaw's ghost, you at least have a whole bunch of meat shields you can defend yourself with until you have time to burn all her dolls. All you need is one eyewitness to back up your claims. The rest are disposable. Jamie makes his way in and starts looking for Henry, with Detective Lipton right on his tail. Jamie's so easily fooled that it's almost unbelievable he made it this far. He should have at least brought something he could defend himself with, like Lipton did. Lipton eventually catches up with him, and they start teaming up to look for Henry.
And I'm telling you, he is not here.
Yes, he is.
Jamie warns him not to scream, and they press on further into the theater.
Don't scream.
They find all the rest of the dolls placed in cubes, and someone obviously brought them back there. They also find the rotting corpse of Michael Ashen, Jamie's long-lost relative who has been turned into a doll. Clearly Mary Shaw wasn't as innocent as she might have claimed.
This is how it starts.
The sound starts to die down again, and you know shit's about to hit the fan. All the dolls turn their eyes to look at a clown doll swinging in its chair.
What do you want?
Come closer, and I'll tell you.
Jamie and Lipton honestly have no reason to approach or talk to it. Finding out what she wants isn't going to change anything, so instead I would look for ways to destroy the dolls, while trying to keep her distracted. But as Jamie hasn't had proper time to grieve and get closure over his wife's death, it makes sense that he'd want a proper answer. Moving closer is a bad decision, but as she has yet to do anything except try to scare him, he seems to be in the clear. Remember, the most important thing is to not scream. She gives him a cryptic clue that he wasn't the last Ashen, and that his wife was pregnant. Okay, this might seem like a clear-cut statement at first, but we need to think logically at this point. This could simply mean that he was the youngest person with the Ashen family name, but it could also mean that he's the only one left. So we should consider the fact that his dad has been compromised. His stroke might have involved foul play, so I'd think twice before I consult him again. So anyway, I started blasting. Jamie says that she's living in the dolls, so they start destroying them and head towards the exit. While running, the floor gives out from under them and Detective Lipton falls off and screams, being snatched up and losing his tongue before hitting the ground. I don't think there's much we could have done here. He had already been warned multiple times about not screaming, and there's not enough time nor room to grab a hold of him. The scream might not have been voluntary as he fell from a great height, but I think he could have covered his mouth in time like Jamie does. I guess running headfirst into an abandoned, haunted, worn-down theater might not have been the best idea. Jamie escapes through the water and he manages to make it out in one piece. And at this point he has only one objective in his mind. Get rid of the final doll, Billy. He arrives at the funeral home to find Marion cradling the deceased body of Henry, and she tells him that Jamie's father came and took Billy. While we should take her reduced mental health into consideration, I can't see any reason why she'd lie about him taking the doll. This makes the next step very clear. Jamie has to travel back to his father's house to end this once and for all. He arrives and this time he's not greeted by anyone. He walks in and the sound starts dying down, and he makes it into the next room where he finds Billy. The ghost of Mary Shaw shows up and starts floating towards him. But he chucks Billy into the fire and she seems to disappear. Did we finally manage to defeat her? He spots his father sitting in the wheelchair and moves towards him.
Dad.
He keels over and sudden realization hits. He has been dead the entire time. The perfect doll was his stepmother the entire time, and he turns around to get confronted, only to scream and lose his life. The final death in a long line of fallen ashen family members. At this point, I thought he could have gotten out of it if he had simply held his scream like he did all other parts in the movie. But there is actually an alternate ending where he gets knocked out and tied up anyway. In this scenario, there's nothing he can do as he never bothered to acquire the help of a priest nor a medium, and everything from here on out would just be pure speculation as we have no idea if burning her dolls even did anything. And as a ghost is not something you can fight head on, this is where the story ends no matter what we would do. But at least now he gets to be with his wife forever. You think you could have beaten the curse of Mary Shaw? Let me know down in the comments how you would have survived the movie. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.